Hello ladies and gentlemen, Willie here. I've been struggling with whether to make this video for a little while. I know for a fact there are people who play Classic only for PvP, and that I'll have subscribers who only PvP. PvP is the endgame, and the goal, the focus, the reason behind the game. PvP best in slot, pre-mades, duels and so on. There's undoubtedly a lot of content within player versus player, and it's a core part of the repeatable content when you hit endgame. And believe me, the goal here isn't to bash people who like PvP, it's your free time, I'm not going to tell you what you should enjoy. And I've actually done a solid amount of PvP myself in Classic. The thing is, I just can't seem to like it, and it kind of frustrates me. Back when I played vanilla, I loved PvP, in fact it was part of my endgame then, amongst seeing what dungeons I could solo on my hunter and leveling many alts to around level 30 or so. Back then I played on a PvE server, so PvP boiled down to battlegrounds only really for me, whereas today I'm on a PvP server, so it can happen anywhere really. I even had a level 29 Twink Rogue back then, which probably had some rather questionable gear overall, but it was still a blast to play and lay down those huge crits on clothies. These days I just can't get into it. In fact, I'm a bit jealous of those who are still able to get enjoyment out of PvP. Queuing in a battleground for fun isn't really something I have done in Classic anymore. And I've been trying to put my finger on what I find so unappealing about PvP in Classic. I think it comes down to a number of things. Let's start with things took a turn for the worse. Phase 2. Ah yes, World PvP. Now, as you may know, I main Alliance and I'm on a PvP server, which meant that Phase 2 was horrible. The amount I played dropped off considerably. The thought of doing several res runs for an extra 20 or 30 minutes, of having a grey screen to go pretty much anywhere that was high population, wasn't all too appealing. So you may think, oh, just typical Alliance player can't handle PvP on a PvP server, which aside from making no sense for Phase 2, I've leveled a Shaman to 60 on a PvP server, and guess what? Having a little red emblem next to my name instead of a blue one doesn't make getting ganked any more fun. Surprising that, isn't it? And just to reiterate for Phase 2, some of you guys may not remember it too well, or may have not even played it yourselves. I would be glad that you've missed it. The honour and ranking system were introduced without any battlegrounds, which is how it was in vanilla by the way. This meant that players were actively incentivized to gank, corpse camp, and pretty much set up roadblocks to get into any dungeons. Blizzard also, at the time of Phase 2 coming out, made the epic gamer move of opening free server transfers for certain servers. If before Phase 2 your server was a little lopsided, after Phase 2 it was completely dominated, one side or the other. This big brain combination of events made certain servers have over 90% faction representation. Also back then there were no paid transfers either, so if you didn't get the memo and leave your server before the window closed, well you might as well just quit because everyone else has left. Phase 2 certainly wasn't a good time for the Alliance. Neither was it for the Horde. The more dominated your faction was on your server, the worse it got. Horde had to play like vultures fighting over scraps of honour. Horde players would actually gank in Ironforge, resurrect, pom pyro, die, repeat, for over 12 hours a day. Certain areas of Ironforge were genuinely dangerous to go through, and you almost had to expect PvP. It was wild. Following Battlegrounds coming out though, things certainly calmed down in the open world over time as people hit their ranking goals. Even still, in my experience with World PvP, it hasn't really left a great mark. In fact, I don't really like World PvP at all. If I could change one thing about my personal journey with Classic, it would be to be on a PvE server. World PvP was so hyped up and I'd never experienced it my first time around in vanilla. I hope this was my chance to relive some of that, and it's just been a disappointment. The vast majority of World PvP is ganking, and honestly I'm not even remotely interested in ganking. Taking somebody out because I'm a higher level, have more health, or just outnumber them feels cheap. It feels like a participation prize. There's no challenge, and when it happens to me it's just tedious and boring. You may say, what about contesting farming spots though, or competing for resources? I'll tell you what happens. Someone takes me out when I'm low, then I res run back and wait for them to get low, then I take them out. Wow, great. Until someone calls friends there and then you just win on numbers. Even when I'm on my Shaman, it's the exact same kind of deal, except that I found that Alliance gank far more, funnily enough, than Horde ever did. People are still not over Phase 2. And for me, the open world isn't a good place for PvP. I like PvP when both parties are ready to PvP, and you cannot always be ready in the open world. It's so easy to exploit weaknesses. It's not something that interests me, and I think it's a big reason why PvP has gone downhill for me personally. So even beyond Phase 2, we had Battlegrounds, a more even playing field. I had hoped. And if you're queuing up, you're ready to rumble, right? Well, sort of. I have got some enjoyment out of Battlegrounds. Recently I did Exalted in Ultric Valley on my Paladin and had more close games than expected and actually enjoyed it quite a bit, but at the end of the day, if the gear reward weren't there at Exalted, I would have never set foot in there. I realise that. The reason so many people are PvPing isn't for PvP. So many people are chasing reputation rewards or ranking, and honestly this is a side effect of the ranking system, which is an awful system overall. And after having skipped out of world PvP for honour grinding, once Ultric Valley was out, I was ready to go on my main. I wanted rank 10 for the gear, possibly even pushing 11 for the mount. I stopped in week 2. Why? If I wanted to rank, it meant running down to Drekthar for hours and hours every day. No thanks. The Honour Spy add-on showed how much people were grinding at the higher brackets, and if I wanted to rank in a reasonably time efficient manner, it meant playing all day every day, or joining a pre-made. Pre-mades. Now, don't get me wrong, it's an MMORPG you should absolutely 100% be able to play with your friends or like-minded people. Trying to separate groups out because some people don't have a pre-made or can't be bothered trying to find one doesn't make any sense. But pre-mades have done a whole lot of bad to Battlegrounds. I don't think you can really argue this. These days people have gone to huge lengths to exploit the gameplay systems of this old game, and Blizzard have had to make many changes to try and stop people taking advantage of these systems. I'm not going to go into massive detail here, check my Phase 3 review if you want a full rundown, I'll link it below. But scouting was nerfed, they tried to nerf Ultric Valley pre-mading, exit portals were removed due to mind control griefing, which is still kind of funny to be honest. These days if you come up against a pre-made as an alliance in Warsong Gulch, people just ask you to die and not release, so the Horde team can win faster, move on to the next game. It's the same deal on the Horde side if you're soloing. You can only pre-made through normal means for Ultric Valley as 5, and you can do it as a full 15 for Arathi Basin. Honestly, I haven't seen too much Arathi Basin yet to let the meta settle, but it's new and you can pre-made, so not much is going to be changing in there, I guess. So just join your own pre-made, you may say, and this is completely missing the point. I want a fairly even game. Pre-made versus pre-made is super fun. Pre-made versus Pug? Pre-made rolls all over them. Pugs don't even release from the graveyards or just stop playing. What's the point? Good honour gains? Good reputation gains? Absolutely. Good PvP? No. Really bad PvP. The whole objective of the Battleground is just turned to grinding another bar to fill. It's sad. I would rather have pre-mades and pugs be separated, to be completely honest. If you're that desperate to crush people, just go make a twink. People are just better at the game these days. Whenever you watch PvP videos from vanilla, you realise that some of these guys playing are well ahead of their time in terms of ability and consumables, whereas the average guy they're attacking is so much worse than what we have nowadays. Back in vanilla, I saw people doing 1v2s or 1v3s and I thought it was epic. Nowadays I watch them and I see a mage in full epics crushing keyboard turners. There's no real contest. I expect them to win almost. These days the majority of players at least have some solid understanding of how to play, as well as decent gear. Our raids are comparatively incredibly easy. The average level 60 raid logger who bashes through a molten core is probably decked out in epics by now. Which brings me to my next point. Class balance. It's really bad. Never has there been such a massive difference between the top and the bottom classes throughout the entirety of World of Warcraft, and funnily enough, more people play the good classes. The sheer amount of warrior and mage you have to deal with is insane. On pretty much any given server, over a third of the players are warrior or mage. Just the lack of seeing variety and facing new classes kind of wears you down. How often do you see enhancement, retribution, shadow or balance per battleground compared to undead mage or orc warrior? Yes, compared to those specific races. On average, probably less. On top of this, there's no patch coming where changes are brought, there'll be no shake-up in the meta. It's just kind of off-putting. The respecking system is also a bit too restrictive. I initially liked class identity, and the fact that you aren't just a class, you are a class and a specialisation. But the more I think about it, the more I want to be able to just play the game. I wish you could choose a specialisation for Battlegrounds and a specialisation out of Battlegrounds. Why? Consider this. In retail, we have freedom of choice in changing specialisations, but so little choice between those talents. In Classic, we have a paywall for changing specialisations, but so much potential in building different loadout. It's really a huge missed opportunity. As a Warlock, if I fancy going Deep Destruction for PvP, and then back to a functional raid spec for raid night, that's 100 gold gone. It's just too much to justify a few Battlegrounds. I wish we could tailor ourselves for PvP a bit more, specifically just when in Battlegrounds, without having to farm gold for hours for the privilege. Spell batching and melee leeway. I've done a whole video on batching. I think it was an interesting idea, I just don't think it's worked out overall. The delay is just too clunky and leads to interactions that change the skill ceiling for classes in a negative manner. I'm going to link it down below. It's a pretty in-depth talk about my problems with it, instead of fully repeating myself here. Leeway is much the same, to be honest, and if batching weren't in the game, there's no real point having leeway either. All it's doing at the moment is giving melee classes a pretty decent advantage for no particular reason other than that's how it was back in the day. I also don't like the lack of competitive format for PvP. There are no arenas or rated battlegrounds, pugs are mixed with premates. People often actively avoid other premates for max honor games. You don't actually know who's good at the game definitively. Now, I can tell you who's good at the game, and they're almost all private server players, but it's nice to be able to put some proof next to that claim though, isn't it, right? Why are you good? Your 10-man premade beats someone else's? You win a duel? Were you even PvP spec'd? Was the guy you're facing PvP spec'd? The ranking system doesn't reflect ability. It reflects time investment. There isn't really a solution for this in Classic, to be honest. It's just something missing from the game, and it was brought in with arenas in TBC. Have you noticed that all the PvP streamers that came over for Classic, and I'm not trying to badmouth them here, I understand it's a nice break from the game, a bit of a shake-up, nothing too wrong with that. But if the most dedicated PvP players prefer corruption over Classic, I think that says a lot about the state of Classic PvP. Overall, I just can't find it enjoyable. It's a shame for me personally. I do have goals to reach Exalted with PvP reputations though, so you may just see me in some battlegrounds all the same. How are you guys feeling about PvP? Big fan or burnt out? As always, I do hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. If you like what you see, give the video a like and subscribe, as there's plenty more to come. As always, thank you all so much for watching. Take care. Bye.